Welcome back to our panel discussion, Strategies for Effective Data Management in Government, sponsored by Veritas here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Michael Sarich, the FOIA Director at the Veterans Health Administration, and David Scott, Director of Product Management at Veritas. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And we've been talking about a lot of ways to classify data, make it findable, and make it discoverable, and make it useful for the FOIA setting, discovery setting, and whatever else we might need data for. But what we haven't talked about is how you get all this done given the practical reality of the size of data sets that are coming through, the amount of data, the volume that we're dealing with. So really, this is an automated process, unlike when we used to stamp pieces of paper, at one point. People could do that. They can't do that with digital media. So David, what are some strategies for the practical ways of getting that enriched metadata applied to the volumes that agencies are dealing with?
That's a great question, Tom. And I'd say that it all starts with, not all data is created equal. And so it starts with visibility, understanding the data you're sitting on, and that drives, is it properly protected? How long do I need to keep it? Does it live or die? Maybe it is garbage content. Maybe no one has touched this file in 10 years. Why do I keep keeping it? Why do I move it from one server to another? Why am I bringing it into OneDrive? So there's that idea of it. I think it starts with classification, understanding who's accessing it, how often. Is it a senior official? Is it some, or not? And that alone might dictate whether this is a permanent record or a temporary record. Some content lends itself very well to capture immediately, and we call it like journaling of email, for example. And instant messages, smaller messages, that type of thing. You might want to journal everybody's communications. You might need to for certain regulations, but you probably don't want to journal my OneDrive account, because I am constantly working on every PowerPoint, there's 80, 90 iterations before it's done. And every Word document, every other thing. You do not want every change. That would just kill your discovery process. And I would say also that things like OneDrive and SharePoint, there's some level of retention and protection, versioning and things like that natively at source. So I always preach the idea that you should proactively collect some content sources, and other sources lend themselves more to collecting at the time of discovery, when you're not collecting for the entire population, but rather for 4 or 5 people that are named in a specific litigation or for certain subjects for a Freedom of Information Act request. When you know exactly what you need, then you go for the bigger content and the content that maybe changes more frequently. And just helps to streamline the discovery process.
But can the application of the metadata to all of this happen in an automated way? I think of it as almost like an egg conveyor, and there's a little laser that's marking the eggs small, medium, large as they go by, because
Absolutely.
you can't do it by hand. Is that type of capability something that's available?
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think sometimes it can be a combination of manual definition by the user and automated, but we definitely, automation has to be part of the equation. And so as content it can be analyzed in place using file analysis tools like our Data Insight product. The content can be classified as it comes into an archive. So that, again, that, okay, this is a senior official, let's keep this indefinitely, no end date. This is a company-wide newsletter. We maybe just keep that for a year, get rid of it, or maybe we don't even archive that content. So you can kind of remove the important stuff from the non-important based on that alone. And we can even set retention policies based on the relative importance of the content, even say where to store it. Maybe this item needs to go on worm storage because we want to make sure it's immutable, nobody can touch it or change it. Whereas other content, not only can it go to non-worm, but it can maybe even safely go up to a cloud storage repository instead. So absolutely, classification drives lifecycle and storage and security.
All right, and Michael, give us the real life example of how you handle all of that automation and storage hierarchy questions at the Veterans Health Administration.
Well, sure. So, as mentioned with the emails, for example, under NAR's capstone approach, we have a number of senior officials whose emails are automatically captured because they have historical value or they're the final decision maker. And you really want to capture that and find out, who made the final decision on X project, and it's generally a small number of people. So, for example, at the Veterans Health Administration, we have 322,000 employees. Not all of them are making historically important, decisions. And me, in particular, I'm not making historically important decisions or emails on a regular, maybe even ever basis. So there'd be no need to automatically capture. And as David pointed out, maybe those are better captured on upon demand. It makes a lot more sense in terms of resource allocation. But the robotic process automation, the RPA of this, is critical because, if you have to take the time every time to add metadata, kind of manually, it's just not going to happen. People just don't have the time to do it. I'm thinking in particular of our hardworking doctors and nurses and folks. They're just not going to be able to do that and then still provide premier service to our veteran community. So that's going to be something that's just going to fall off the plate. You have to be realistic in terms of what's going to happen. The Department of State is doing some groundbreaking work in terms of categorizing their records, what is in terms of their emails in particular, where it's a quick drop down and then they go. We're working on a project where we'll go in the background for electronically stored information, and the user is going to be oblivious that we're even going to get this information, which is great because the user has a day job, right? The user is serving patients. The user is investigating new drug strains to fight COVID-19. The user is doing really critical work for people's health, and this saves that person from going into their emails or from going into their file folders and then sending stuff that may or may not be relevant. So that enriched metadata really is transformative in terms of being able to pull that in the background and make sure that we're filling our mandate under the FOIA to conduct a search that's reasonably calculated to capture relevant documents. And if we don't do that, then we're not meeting our mandate, and then we're at litigation risk and at significant exposure. So making sure that these processes have a high reliability. VHA is very focused on being a high reliability organization, even fine tuning some of the outstanding work being done across the world. That also applies to FOIA. That also applies to records. That also applies to the whole discipline. We're all dedicated to making this vision a reality and further improvement, and it starts there for sure.
One of the things you mentioned, Michael, around doctors. I mean, how much time do they spend making notes, annotating every visit with a patient? Maybe telemedicine can be a way of automating some of that. What if we could pull out the symptoms and tie that to a diagnosis code? What if we could transcribe the entire visit so that goes into the record instead of the doctor having to spend an hour after each patient writing it or whatever the time is? I'm sure it's a great deal of time and takes them away from actually caring for patients. That's the brave new world, the future that I'd like to see.
Yeah, actually taking that data, pivoting it, applying it to deliver better health outcomes for our veterans is incredible, especially in that so much of the groundbreaking work that occurs at the Veterans Health Administration is then immediately shared with the wider populations. Our fourth mission, which came into effect during the pandemic, which is general population care, and just being able to provide that additional value to the American people and then indeed the world through that research is critical. Being able to derive decisions and methodologies, treatment kind of pathways for folks is critical, and it starts there at that data point.
And Michael, just to bring it back down a notch, you mentioned an elaborate process for capturing and applying the metadata. Is that dynamic over time? Because as the data moves through the life cycle, whether it's headed to archives for permanent keeping or maybe there's disposal schedules, does that work also automatically over time, dynamically?
Yeah, it's an important topic in this area because just like you can have data creep, you can have metadata creep, and you can get so many tags in a document that they're no longer relevant, right? There's so much that then you go to do a search and you get the sun, the moon, the earth, and the stars, but really you're just looking for the stars, or you're just looking for one star in particular, the sun. And so making sure that metadata doesn't creep up to making it a previously usable, findable, discoverable document into something that just goes into the phone book, and you end up having to start basically from scratch. We all have the picture of the banker's boxes filled with paper that you have to kind of go through manually. If the metadata creep is allowed to go unchecked, you end up in that same spot. You have a few fancier tools, but you still end up with this large amount of work that an individual has to go through kind of line by line or document by document to ensure that we're meeting the mission. So yeah, the metadata creep's an issue, and then in particular, it will change because it must change, right? It must change because as it goes through the process. And that's one of the exciting things in this field. There's so many iterative changes. You know, the further down this path we go, the more challenges we see and the more obstacles we get to overcome. And that's one of the exciting things about working in this field, is that there's always something new. There's always a new challenge that we get to work together with our partners in the industry and our colleagues across the federal family and kind of cross those bridges together as a community.
And David, let's move back up a notch. What should a infrastructure, how should it be architected to do all of this? Because we talked about robotic process automation, the multiplicity of sources and devices that are producing data that needs to be taken care of. And then we're in a cloud environment, a cloud era, if you will. So that must complicate or maybe it simplifies in some sense, the architecture of the system for ensuring that we capture what we need to capture in these data discovery situations.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. And I think it depends on the cloud part of that depends on the agency's comfort with, you know, whether they want to be on-prem or in the cloud or some level in between. We invest heavily in our on-premise environment. We also invest heavily in our SaaS solution, and you know, we're working towards a FedRAMP certified solution for that as well. But we also have a lot of customers in the middle where they have an on-premise environment for their archive, but they take advantage of cloud storage for a subset of data. And it might be, again, routed based on classification. You know, this contains personal data. Let's keep that on-premise where we have tight control on it. Maybe it's less serious, less dangerous content. It can be put up to the cloud. We also have a lot of customers that are taking what was on-prem and doing a lift and shift into AWS or Azure, and we can even support C2S with Amazon for for security agencies. So there's a lot of so that's part of it. I think flexible deployment and planning for the future, having a solution that can be deployed on-prem or in the cloud, and there's a clear journey there. I think secondly, you need something that can collect all these different sources. You need to know the sources that you want to collect and the sources that you want to prevent people from using. So there might be a bit of data loss prevention. There might be actually hard stop of certain content sources. But then for anything you know people are using that are critical to your business, you've got to have a path to capture them in some fashion or protect them at source. That's also an option.
All right, and Michael, in the time we have left, maybe comment on that and tell us what some of the success metrics that you have for the function that you have in fulfilling FOIA through really good background data management. We've got about a minute left to tell us what you think.
Well, sure. I mean, we strive to have, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the context, the content, and the users. That really drives, that kind of trinity drives how we organize our information. We want to make sure that the users have a useful end product, and you know that the context of the documents are there, and they're able we're able to get that content out. It's a really critical piece, you know, as we mentioned, moving forward. But we're really blessed to have great partners at the Office of Information Technology, at the Veterans Administration, and of course our federal family at NARA to implement these.
So basically, you don't get too many FOIA requesters coming back and saying, "That's not what I wanted."
We try not to. We work really diligently with our requesters. We use the old-fashioned tool of the telephone quite a lot to work with them and make sure that we're getting what they deserve and what they need in a timely manner. Our motto is targeted requests and timely responses, and that's what we work to do to make sure that folks get what they need and they get it in a reasonable time frame, so we can help tell the great story of the Veterans Health Administration. You know, the work that we're doing on behalf of America's veterans.
All right, so ultimately all this activity does support the federal mission writ large, which brings us to the close of the discussion. I want to thank today's guests. David Scott is the Director of Product Management at Veritas, and Michael Sarich is the FOIA Director at the Veterans Health Administration. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, and you've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Veritas.